background on this Labor Day. I'm Alex Wilson. Mike Bettis has the evening off, and maybe you unplugged for the long weekend. We've got a lot to bring you up to speed on. Right now, island nations in. Dr. Nab, our hurricane expert, former director of the National Hurricane Center, things are going to be changing very soon for some of those locations.
Yes, and I want to highlight for these international locations that are about to be impacted over the next couple of days, there's been, I am sure of it, close coordination between the National Hurricane Center in Miami and the individual meteorological services of these countries. These warnings that these individual countries are issuing are based on all that collaboration, data from the hurricane hunters, the best tools available. Take it seriously if you have interest in those locations.
Yeah, you're running out of time to prepare, and not to scare you, but this is why you say prepare well ahead of the storm before resources get slim and time's running out.
Yep, and if you're under one of these warnings in the Leeward Islands, then the time to prepare is tonight and early tomorrow, because while the weather is really good right now, the waves are picking up, but the atmosphere looks pretty good because of the sinking in the periphery of a major hurricane. That's a common occurrence. Truly the calm before the storm. Right. But as this gets closer tomorrow, the winds will pick up in the Leeward Islands, and maybe by late tomorrow, the winds of tropical storm force will arrive, and then the time to prepare is over, and you got to be inside for the duration of the event. That's in the hurricane warning areas. Then farther west, hurricane watches in effect for the British and U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. The time when the winds of tropical storm force could arrive there would be early Wednesday, so you have tonight and tomorrow to prepare in those locations, but you could end up getting the core of a major hurricane, perhaps Category 4 plus or minus. Right. Scary situation, no doubt, but that's why these last few hours and almost a day is the time to take your preparations very seriously. Rush them to completion now.
Right, and get to your safe location. I know some airlines are flying more flights out of, say, places like St. Martin, obviously canceling the flights heading to those locations.
Yeah, and they're not going to be landing and taking off once the tropical storm conditions arrive. Now, the general sense of the track forecast is pretty well defined west-northwestward motion all the way until about Saturday. But the details are what are going to determine who gets what impacts. And again, we keep highlighting the fact that a good chunk of this cone goes over a lot of land in Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, and Cuba. A track on the left side of that cone would be a lot more land interaction, perhaps a weaker system, and greater impacts to those island nations, no doubt about it. On the right-hand side of the cone, a lot less land interaction, lesser impacts to the island nations, except for maybe the Bahamas down the road, but a stronger storm. And the Hurricane Center's intensity forecast is predicated on it going down the middle of that cone and having minimal land interaction. Right. And they've already acknowledged in their discussion that intensity forecast goes out the window if it goes on the left side of that cone and you have a lot more land interaction. So we don't know exactly where it will be, and because of that, we don't know exactly how strong it will be because land interaction will play such a huge role. Yeah,
so still so many questions moving forward, and still so much disagreement between our weather models. We have some keeping up that westward track, others forecasting that right turn over Florida.
Yeah, if you stay way back from your TV, you'll think, oh, they all agree. It's all going west-northwestward. Well, get a little closer to the screen and look at some of these tracks go right over the Virgin Islands of Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, right over Cuba and toward the Gulf. Some of these lines go farther north. Some of them turn right after the 5 days into Florida, some head into the Gulf of Mexico. And why such uncertainty, especially at long ranges in the models? It's because we don't know exactly where that trough over the east coast is going to be when we get to the late part of the week. But factoring in all those uncertainties, right now, if you're in Miami, about a 1 out of 3 shot of winds of tropical storm force, about a 1 out of 6, about a 5%, 1 out of 20 shot of hurricane force winds. So at 5 days lead time, it's still a relatively small chance at any one spot of getting hurricane force winds. It's just that the threat is there over a pretty large area.
Right, and as we get through the week, things should become a little bit more clear as those atmospheric players become a little bit more clear.
Yes, and we do have the luxury of time in South Florida, maybe till Saturday, Saturday evening before the tropical storm conditions could arrive. Obviously, the time is a lot shorter in the Leeward Islands, but the steering mechanisms meteorologically, what's going on that makes the 5, 6, 7 day forecast outlook so difficult? We just don't know what the configuration of this jet will be. Does it pull Irma north? Does it leave and allow a ridge to build back in. It goes into the Gulf. Is a weaker system interacting with land lumbering into the Gulf? Is a stronger system curving? Something in between? We just don't know. But heads up, obviously, in Florida.
Yeah, prepare now. This is something we'll obviously continue to alert you on as we go through the coming weeks
and
or coming days.
Yeah, and still can't rule out anywhere Texas to Maine after Florida.
Absolutely. And so folks from South Texas all the way up to New England need to be on alert. Over some of the Caribbean islands, weaken, even fizzle out and not make an impact or a landfall in the U.S. So a lot of options. We've got Dr. Rick Knabb in a moment, Dr. Erika Navarro here with us. We got a whole team of experts to help us break this all down. Dr. Knabb, I can only imagine that you are the most popular guy in town getting asked where and when is this going to hit? And that's the million-dollar question.
Yeah, and I got a text from my mom in Texas. Wants to know,
mom's
and all
asking,
her friends want to know. Yeah,
yep.
Well, we all want to know, and we'll tell you what we know and what we don't know. We're not going to do anything extreme either way. We're going to kind of paint the picture so you can have time to prepare for what could happen where you live. Right now, it's a Category 4 hurricane. It's menacing. It's scary, no doubt about it. And if you look at where it's headed toward the Leeward Islands, Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico under hurricane watches and warnings, preparation time is tonight and tomorrow morning in most of those places. And in the general sense, the forecast track is pretty well defined. A relatively straight track west-northwestward. Okay, well, what's the complication? Well, there's details here. South side of the track versus north side of the track. How intense it gets depends on exactly what track it takes. And then, of course, everybody's asking, well, what happens beyond 5 days? Well, let's just take a little peek into what some of the models are showing. This is not all of the model solutions. These are just a sampling that gives you an idea of how much uncertainty there is. Some models turn it right after it gets to the Florida Straits. Some go into the Gulf of Mexico. And there are others that are in between and are farther extremes on either side. Now, why do things get so uncertain after this west-northwestward motion through this work week? The main question is, into this weekend, is does this upper level trough, this dip in the jet stream that will materialize middle of this week, how long does it hang out? How long and how strong does it remain over the eastern U.S.? A strong dip in the jet stream could pick Irma up, especially if it's over water and strong, and maybe even curve it before reaching the U.S. A weaker system, especially over land areas like Cuba, where the trough lifts out and a ridge builds in, could allow it to come into the Gulf of Mexico. But there's so many variables beyond what I just summarized in the big picture. So Dr. Navarro and I are going to talk about how do we sort all this out and why are we saying that everybody from Texas to Maine is still in play?
Yeah, unfortunately, out beyond 5 days, the details are still coming together, and we have even extra instruments out right now to help us get those details. But Dr. Knabb is drawing on the cone here, and this is only showing you where the center of the storm to go. The impacts are always, of course, going to be felt outside, but where the center goes here is really key. Yeah,
let's first talk about the details within this cone. Why is it so important whether or not it stays on the right-hand or left-hand side of the cone? A track on the left side means a lot of land interaction. Bad news for Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, Cuba, but a weaker system potentially. And on the right side, it could be a lot stronger. You combine that with uncertainties on what is going to be the deal with this trough over the eastern U.S., and then it still has the major steering mechanism over the water.
Yeah, that's right. Right now in the Atlantic, we have a very strong high pressure system. That's what's steering Irma right now to the west and gradually off to the north. But just how high and how far that southern branch protrudes and how quickly it's able to turn Irma to the north has drastically different impacts here, because we could be talking about something curving a little closer to Florida or something coming up towards Carolina or even missing completely.
Now, what if I'm the trough and you're the ridge and I decide I don't want to hang around for the weekend and I depart? What could happen to the ridge?
Yeah, exactly. If that trough moves out of the way a little more quickly, that would loosen the steering flow on Irma to the north, and we could be seeing something coming a little bit further here into the Gulf, because then that high pressure would come into play. That is definitely not a scenario that we want to see here, but unfortunately, we cannot outrule that chance right now.
And even a weaker Irma, if it does have a lot of land interaction, if it does get into the Gulf of Mexico or goes over Florida and it's not Cat 3, 4, or 5, it can still have major impacts. How many Cat 1s and 2s or even tropical storms have we seen produce major impacts due to water? So regardless, something dangerous comes our way.
I think we can't stress that enough, regardless of the intensity. Obviously, the intensity is important, but everyone here, Texas to Maine, you need to be prepared this week.
Yeah, Alex, we still have a slight chance that it misses the U.S. altogether, but those chances appear to be going down.
Yeah, every day we go forward, it gets a little bit smaller. Time to prepare, as our experts say. right now for the worst case scenario. We've got much more still out of the tragic circumstances for so many. The spirit of the community really overwhelmingly positive. Janelle Klein, thank you so much. Dr. Erika Navarro here with us now because we are watching a system in the Gulf. Of course, a lot of folks, especially in the Houston area, parts of East Texas, this would worry anybody, but there is some good news with this in relation to those areas.
Yes, a little bit of rain here is just too soon in a lot of these areas, but looking like this moisture associated with this system is going to be staying off to the south in the Gulf of Mexico. So right now, we do have a 50% chance of development in the next 5 days, so we're going to be watching this one fairly closely. But even if we see some development and organization here, that moisture is going to be held down by a cold front, so it's not looking like that moisture is going to be moving off to the north, which is definitely some good news. So if you notice here through the later part of this week, all of that area of red, that high moisture stays off to the south in the Gulf of Mexico. None of that is coming up into play, so we may get some spotty showers into the Gulf Coast of Texas down into New Orleans, but all of that very heavy rainfall is not going to be moving onto the coast.
Yeah, that is wonderful news to anyone watching in an area still affected by flooding. There's your GFS model still keeping that moisture. So good agreement that this is going to stay south of here.
Yes, absolutely. So again, we could be seeing a little bit here into Texas and Louisiana, but not anything like we saw with Harvey. This is definitely good news for the time being.
Awesome. Dr. Navarro, thank you so much. Well, we still have a lot of uncertainties with Hurricane Irma's ultimate track and landfall. We're going to